The cafe smelled of roasted beans and warm pastries, but nothing could mask the tension that seemed to hum in the air the moment he walked through the door. Jay, usually impervious to the world outside his skyscraper office, froze in the doorway, scanning the small, bustling room like it was a battlefield. He had passed through the glittering social circles of the city 1,000 times, yet here, among the quiet hum of espresso machines and the faint laughter of early patrons, he felt exposed in a way he hadn't in years. His sharp eyes immediately found her. She was behind the counter, apron slightly smudged with flour, hair pulled back loosely, moving with a practiced grace as she prepared drinks with precision that belied her exhaustion. She was nothing like the women who lined the charity galas he attended, women polished to perfection, smiles rehearsed to disarm. No, she was real, and that truth cut through the armor he had built around himself. Her name was Amara, and even before he spoke she had sensed him. A flicker of awareness, subtle but undeniable, crossed her face as their eyes met for the first time across the room. He didn't move immediately. He just observed, studying the way her hands moved over the espresso machine, how her brow furrowed ever so slightly when a customer asked for a complicated order, how the corners of her mouth softened in the rare moments of genuine amusement. Every detail imprinted itself on him. He hadn't planned to come here, yet now that he was here, he realized he wouldn't leave until he understood what it was about her that made the chaos of his life, his power, his obligations, the weight of his family legacy, suddenly feel lighter, almost fragile. Amara wiped her hands on her apron, her movements smooth but unhurried, a kind of quiet confidence that came from navigating hardship and knowing exactly how far she could push without breaking. She had moved to this city with dreams too big for the small-town streets she grew up on, carrying herself like she was always on the edge of proving something, not to the world but to herself. The cafe was just a job, a means to survive, and yet in her careful, deliberate gestures, she revealed resilience that made him want to lean in, to learn more, even though every instinct in his world screamed caution. "Can I get a black coffee, no sugar?" he said finally, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the air between them crackle. She nodded, her movements fluid as she filled the cup, and for a moment their fingers brushed. He felt the spark instantly, a current that made him aware of every past mistake, every calculated decision he had made to keep his heart guarded, now seeming irrelevant. She handed him the cup, eyes meeting his for just a second longer than necessary, and he caught himself. The moment lasted 3 seconds, a fleeting exchange that held more gravity than any boardroom negotiation, any gala he had endured. "You work early shifts," he said, more an observation than a question. She shrugged lightly, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. "Someone's got to keep the world caffeinated." It was mundane, almost dismissive, but in those words he felt the pulse of someone grounded, someone who didn't wear a facade of wealth or influence, someone immune to the trappings that had ensnared him for decades. He lingered by the counter, pretending to check his phone while his mind raced. How could someone so ordinary, so unsuspecting, unsettle him so completely? He had walked past hundreds of socialites, women whose beauty was engineered to command attention, yet here, a single smile, a single glance, had undone him. He realized, with an intensity that made his chest tighten, that he wanted more than just this moment. He wanted to know her story, her struggles, her triumphs, the small victories that kept her moving forward despite exhaustion and setbacks. Amara handed another drink to a patron, moving with effortless professionalism, and he knew he had to act before the moment slipped away. I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice slightly unsteady. "I don't usually do this, but can I buy you lunch? Just lunch. 1 hour. If it's terrible, I'll never trouble you again." She blinked, surprise flashing in her dark eyes. "I don't even know your name," she said, amusement and suspicion warring in her tone. He gave a faint smile, almost rueful. "Names can come later," he said, "but I need to see if that moment, your smile, was real." She studied him, the faint lines of fatigue softening under the curiosity in her gaze. The cafe noise faded in their bubble of attention. Finally, with a subtle exhale, she nodded. 1 hour, she said, her voice steady, though her heart betrayed her with a quickened beat. "You're buying." As he followed her to a small table by the window, he felt the gravity of the choice. Every life he had controlled, every decision measured, every threat navigated, and realized none of it mattered in comparison to this fragile, unscripted connection. Outside, the city moved obliviously, but inside, time seemed suspended, charged with a tension neither fully understood yet both could feel. The world of power, money, and influence waited beyond the door, but here, in the hum of the cafe, something entirely new had begun, and neither of them could anticipate how explosive, how dangerous, how transformative it would become. He returned the next morning, though he told himself it was purely by coincidence, as if fate had simply pushed him through the same door again. The scent of roasted coffee beans greeted him first, warm and grounding, yet it did nothing to calm the storm in his chest. The café was busier than yesterday, a quiet hum of conversation and clinking porcelain filling the air. He scanned the room as he entered, and there she was, moving with the same effortless rhythm that had captivated him the day before. Every detail seemed magnified, the tilt of her head as she listened to a customer's odd request, the subtle crease in her brow when she concentrated on frothing milk, the way her smile softened the otherwise mundane task of handing over a cup of steaming espresso. He lingered by the counter, pretending to study the menu while his eyes refused to leave her. Amara glanced up at him briefly, her gaze fleeting but unmistakably aware. A part of him marveled at how someone so ordinary could carry such a commanding presence without even trying. It was infuriating in a way that made him ache. He had walked past so many women, socialites groomed to perfection, who had expected attention, admiration, and flattery. None of them had stirred him like this. None had managed to unsettle him, to make his chest tighten, to make him question the walls he had built around himself. He finally approached the counter, and their eyes met in a deliberate moment that hung between them, electric and fragile. "Back again," she said casually, as if it were a simple observation. Her tone, light and teasing, contrasted sharply with the heaviness of the effect she had on him. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, his own smile faint, measured. "I thought I might check if the coffee is as good as they say." He gestured vaguely at the counter, though in reality he had no intention of sampling the drink. His attention was entirely on her, on the way she moved, on the effortless honesty she radiated. She laughed softly at his words, a sound that seemed to thread its way through his defenses. It was genuine, unpracticed, and for a moment he almost forgot the calculated life he had mastered. That brief lapse, this vulnerability, was frightening, thrilling, and irresistible. He felt the familiar pull of curiosity, the need to know her, to understand her, to claim a part of her world for himself without overstepping or scaring her away. And yet, the risks lingered, like shadows at the edge of his awareness. He was a man with enemies, responsibilities, and a life so tightly controlled that one misstep could unravel everything. She handed him the coffee, their fingers brushing once more, a spark igniting that made him catch his breath. This simple gesture, repeated for the second time, was enough to unmoor him further. He realized with a jolt that he had begun to care, not about appearances, status, or perfection, but about the life she lived, the strength she carried quietly, and the honesty in her gaze. Her world was one of struggle, of effort and small victories, but it was real, and he had been starved of authenticity for so long that he found it almost painful to watch. As he lingered, watching her interact with other customers, he began to notice small details that would have been invisible to anyone else. The way she remembered regulars' orders without writing them down. The careful attention she paid to a nervous student fumbling with a phone payment. The fleeting frustration when the espresso machine spat a hiss of steam incorrectly, immediately corrected with a subtle, controlled breath. Every detail painted a picture of a woman resilient in the face of ordinary challenges, a stark contrast to his world of overblown stakes and performance. He dared a question, his voice low, measured. "Do you ever wonder if life could be bigger than this?" She paused mid-pour, eyes narrowing slightly, curious yet cautious. "Bigger?" she repeated. "Maybe. But I like the life I can touch, the things I can control." Her honesty hit him like a punch. She wasn't swayed by charm, by wealth, or by any imagined prestige. She was grounded, unflinching, and entirely immune to the trappings that had ensnared him his entire life. Something in him shifted. He realized he wanted more than fleeting encounters, more than observation from a distance. He wanted to step into her world without destroying it, to navigate the fine line between desire and propriety, fascination and danger. And as he watched her smile at a laughing child who had come in with a parent, he knew this was no ordinary attraction. It was a gravitational pull, relentless, impossible to ignore. By the time he left the café, his thoughts were tangled in a way they hadn't been in years. He had survived boardroom battles, feigned alliances, and family pressures that could crush weaker men. Yet here, in the quiet hum of a neighborhood café, a woman he barely knew had unraveled him completely. And he knew, with a certainty that sent chills through him, that the collision of their worlds was inevitable. The sun fell behind the skyline as he stepped into the street, and he realized he had no plan, no strategy, no carefully calculated move to protect himself from what was happening. All he knew was that he would return, that he would risk the unknown, and that the next encounter could change everything. His carefully controlled life, her ordinary existence, and the fragile, burning connection forming between them. Somewhere deep down, he wondered if she even realized the storm she had unknowingly invited into her world, and whether either of them could survive the consequences. He couldn't stop thinking about her, though he told himself he was only curious, only observing, only checking in on a fleeting spark that might fade with time. But by the third morning, his denial had grown threadbare. The moment he pushed the cafe door open, the smell of coffee and warm pastries wrapping around him like a familiar coat, he knew it wasn't casual anymore. Her eyes met his across the crowded room, and he caught the flicker of recognition, and maybe a hint of amusement. She didn't run from him. She didn't look away. She simply carried on as if daring him to catch up. He approached the counter, his heart an unfamiliar drumbeat in his chest, betraying the cool, calculated facade he wore for the world. I thought I might try something new today, he said, his voice steady, though his fingers itched to touch the sleeve of her uniform. She raised an eyebrow, glancing at the menu with the faintest smirk. New, she repeated, her tone teasing but wary. You've had the same latte every day. He let the words hang. It was a challenge, a game he didn't quite know the rules for. She tilted her head, watching him carefully, her eyes sharp. Then why come back? She asked quietly, almost under her breath. The question wasn't loud enough for anyone else to hear, but it reverberated through him like a collision of worlds. He wanted to lie, wanted to deflect with charm, wanted to brush it off with a smooth grin. But the truth was too dangerous, too real. I don't know, he admitted, and the vulnerability in his own voice startled him. He hadn't allowed anyone to see that side of him in years, not since the careful construction of the persona that had made him untouchable, feared, and respected. Her eyes softened slightly, though she didn't let it slip too far. Instead, she handed him his cup with a casual air that belied the tremor of awareness between them. Then figure it out, she said lightly, though her voice carried weight as if she knew he already had. The tension between them was almost unbearable, a taut wire humming with potential energy. Each gesture, each glance, each flicker of attention was charged with meaning they didn't yet name aloud. He stayed longer than usual, lingering under the pretense of enjoying the morning sun through the cafe windows, but the real reason was clear. He was tethered to her presence, drawn like iron to a magnet. And every moment he lingered, he risked exposing himself, risking the fragile barrier between attraction and recklessness. Outside, the world was loud and unforgiving. Inside, the cafe was a small universe where time slowed, where every sound and movement carried significance. He noticed the way she handled a spilled cup, moving with efficiency and calm, how she steadied a nervous barista in training, guiding them without impatience, her focus absolute. She was fearless in ways he admired, qualities he could never cultivate in a world built on manipulation, strategy, and power. And for reasons he didn't fully understand, he wanted to protect her, even as he wanted to claim her. Then came the first sign of danger. A man in a tailored suit entered the cafe, scanning the room with sharp eyes that immediately found him. The subtle tension in the man's posture, the brief flicker of recognition when their gazes met, it was a silent warning. Someone from his world tracking him, watching. The presence reminded him that his life wasn't built for moments like this, for ordinary warmth and small connections. It was built on control, fear, and a careful balance of influence. And yet here he was, risking all of it for a woman who didn't even know the half of who he was. She noticed it too, the brief exchange of glances, the subtle shift in his posture. Her hand froze mid-pour, and for a fraction of a second, her eyes betrayed a flicker of concern, sharp, instinctive, protective. That look alone made him want to curl the world around them like a shield. He realized that danger didn't only exist outside this cafe, it was creeping closer to her, to them, and that he was powerless to keep it contained entirely. He finished his drink quickly, leaving a generous tip and a silent promise. The moment he stepped outside, the man in the suit followed, disappearing into the crowd, a shadow of the storm waiting for him beyond these walls. And in that instant he understood the stakes. This wasn't just a matter of desire or fascination. It was a collision of two worlds, one ordinary, honest and grounded, the other ruthless, dangerous and filled with secrets. As he walked away, the wind carrying the early morning chill against his face, he couldn't shake the thought that they had both been marked. She didn't know it yet, but every moment together from this point forward was a gamble. And he knew deep down that he would gamble everything to see her again, to breach the invisible barrier between their worlds, even if it meant exposing parts of himself he had long kept buried. Tomorrow he promised himself he would return. And tomorrow things would change, whether she was ready or not. The next day the café felt smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were aware of the storm gathering outside. He arrived earlier than usual, slipping through the door with silent precision, scanning for any threats, any trace of someone who might compromise this fragile world he had begun to inhabit. She was already there, apron tied neatly, hands dusted with flour from morning preparations, her movements fluid and deliberate. For a moment, he considered leaving, retreating to the safety of shadows where no one could touch him, no one could see the cracks forming in his careful armor. But he didn't. He couldn't. Back again, she said, voice carrying the faintest edge of amusement. Her eyes met his, unflinching, and for the first time he felt caught, not by someone trying to trap him but by her calm, unwavering attention. It unnerved him more than any threat from his world ever could. "You're predictable," she added, pouring a fresh cup with a practiced hand. "I'm learning," he said, carefully neutral, though his pulse betrayed the thrill beneath his words. He watched her as she worked, each gesture precise, controlled, yet effortlessly human. She moved like someone who understood herself completely, someone grounded in a reality he had long since abandoned. And in that contrast lay the fascination he couldn't resist. But fascination has a cost. The man in the tailored suit from yesterday lingered in his thoughts, a reminder that the boundary between his worlds was thinner than he wanted to admit. He knew without question that his presence here didn't go unnoticed. Someone from his circle, or someone hunting him, could walk in at any moment. And if that happened, she would be exposed to danger she didn't even know existed. His mind raced, calculating contingencies, evaluating the risk of staying versus leaving. He had trained himself for high-stakes situations, for managing threats with precision, for being untouchable. But she disrupted all of that. Her presence was chaos in its purest, most human form, a challenge he couldn't suppress. And that challenge terrified him in ways he wasn't used to. She slid the latte across the counter and their fingers brushed. A spark, electric and disarming, ran through him. She didn't flinch, didn't pull back, just raised an eyebrow, a silent question, and a test he didn't know how to pass. "Careful," she said lightly, voice carrying that subtle warning tone. "I've seen people hurt when they ignore boundaries." He smiled, faint, tight, a predator masking confusion, but inside he was already unraveling. The tension between them was a slow burn, a current pulling him toward something he couldn't name but didn't want to avoid. He had rejected 100 distractions, 100 socialites, 100 people who existed in the sterile, curated world he dominated. But she was different. She was fire, unpolished and real, impossible to categorize, impossible to own fully. Then came the knock on the door, a sound so ordinary it might have gone unnoticed, except for the way it drew his attention like a predator detecting a shift in the wind. His instinct screamed. He turned, scanning the entrance. A delivery man? A regular customer? No. The shadow at the edge of the doorway carried the precision of trained observation. He was here. The same man from yesterday, only closer, sharper, more deliberate. She noticed too, though she didn't look at him for reassurance. Her gaze stayed on the counter, on the coffee machine, her hand steady as she prepared a drink for another customer. Yet the tension in her shoulders betrayed her awareness, an instinct, a sixth sense that something was off. And that awareness only tightened the pull in his chest, the responsibility weighing heavier than ever. He rose, carefully, deliberately, his movements fluid, predatory. "Stay here," he said, low, commanding, yet not without the faintest edge of vulnerability. She tilted her head slightly, understanding more than he expected, but she didn't move. Perhaps she trusted him. Perhaps she didn't care. Either way, he couldn't risk exposing her to the chaos beyond these walls. The man stepped inside, casual, calculated, a shadow with eyes that searched too thoroughly. And in that instant everything shifted. The air thickened, charged with the collision of two worlds. Her ordinary universe, his dangerous one, converging in the confined space of the café. He was the shield now, the line between her and the storm. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the raw weight of stakes he could no longer control. As the man approached the counter, he stepped forward, heart hammering, presence undeniable. Their eyes met, silent recognition, a warning, a challenge. The first move had been made. And in that moment he realized there was no turning back. Their lives were intertwined now, whether she knew it or not, and the collision of fate and desire had begun. The café was quieter after the encounter, but the echoes of what had just happened lingered in the air like smoke. He stayed close, not leaving her side, even though he knew she didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation. His eyes flicked to every movement, every shadow, alert to the subtle shifts that might signal danger. But in spite of the tension, he found himself watching her, absorbing the way her fingers danced over the coffee machine, the curve of her smile as she handed a cup to a customer, unaware that the world beyond these walls could care so little for her safety. "You're on edge," she said suddenly, voice calm, teasing even, though her eyes were sharper than usual. He stiffened, caught mid-thought, realizing he hadn't even tried to hide it. He had trained himself for danger countless times, yet she could read him like an open book. "Just careful," he replied, deliberately neutral, though the faintest tension laced his words. He wasn't sure if he wanted her to know the truth. That knowing her, that being near her, made him feel vulnerable in ways he hadn't allowed in years. She tilted her head, letting the silence stretch, a question hanging unspoken. "Careful about what?" Her tone wasn't mocking, it was curious, gentle, but laced with an understanding he hadn't expected. He wanted to answer, wanted to tell her about the world he inhabited, the enemies who lurked in corners, the violence that had become routine. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not when it would put her in the line of fire. Instead, he said nothing and watched her, noticing things he hadn't before, the way she laughed at a customer's joke, the way she moved with a confidence so innate it was almost reckless. And that recklessness pulled at him, challenged him, made him question everything he had built around himself. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked suddenly, snapping him from his reverie. There was no judgment in her voice, only curiosity and something else, something dangerous that made his chest tighten. "I like the coffee," he said, voice low, a smirk threatening to break free. He didn't add the truth, that it wasn't the coffee he came for. It was her. Every shift she worked, every laugh, every glance, drew him closer to a reality he wasn't supposed to inhabit. Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning him, searching for the lie she suspected but couldn't confirm. "You're not like the others," she said finally, almost as if admitting a secret to herself. "I see it in you. And I don't mean the suits or the whatever world you come from. I mean you. The real you." For the first time in a long while, he felt exposed, his walls crumbling, and it terrified him. No one had ever seen him like this. No one had ever pulled the mask away and made him feel human. The moment was broken by the soft ding of the cafe door, and he tensed, scanning automatically. A delivery man? A new customer? Or worse? But it was just the morning rush, an ordinary distraction, yet it reminded him that the normal world she occupied could never fully shield her from his chaos. He had to protect her, even if it meant holding her at arm's length, even if it meant living in the shadows while she basked in the light. "Do you want to sit?" she asked suddenly, gesturing to an empty table. The question felt like a challenge, an invitation, and he felt his chest tighten as he hesitated. Sitting here meant crossing a line, showing vulnerability. And yet, he found himself nodding, letting her pull him into a world that was soft and real, completely different from the cold steel of his life. As they talked, small fragments of ordinary life unfolded around them, coffee orders, laughter, and chatter, but he was hyper-aware of every detail, every potential threat, even as he allowed himself to enjoy the moment. He wanted more, though he knew it was dangerous. He wanted to learn her stories, her dreams, her fears, even if revealing his own would destroy them both. Time passed too quickly, and as the cafe emptied, the tension didn't dissipate. It grew, mingled with a curiosity and attraction neither could fully name. He wanted to stay longer, to pull her into his world even if it was reckless. But he also knew he couldn't. Outside, forces he couldn't control waited, and they would not hesitate to reach her if he faltered. Yet when he left, slipping silently into the streets, the thought of her lingered like a weight in his chest, a pull he couldn't resist. He had rejected countless people before, surrounded himself with power and control, but she was different. Real. Dangerous. Irresistible. And as he disappeared into the city, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to admit. He was already lost, already caught, already hers in ways he wasn't ready to name. If you want, I can continue with Chapter 6 next, where their bond is tested by an external threat, escalating both romance and danger. The city streets felt colder that evening, though the winter hadn't fully arrived. He moved through the shadows, senses sharpened, every step calculated. But despite his focus on the streets, on the people who could be watching, his thoughts kept drifting back to her. The way she had smiled, the subtle confidence in her voice, the ease with which she made the world feel lighter. It was a dangerous distraction, one he knew he couldn't afford. He had promised himself countless times that no one would ever reach this close. Not in years. Not since he had built walls around himself strong enough to withstand betrayal, manipulation, and loss. Yet, in her presence, the walls cracked, and with every memory of the café, every laugh and word, the cracks widened. As he rounded a corner, he felt it, a prickling along the back of his neck, an instinct honed by years in a world where one mistake could be fatal. A black car idling too long, a shadow moving just beyond the glow of the streetlights. His heart tightened. Someone had followed him. Someone who knew he had let his guard down. He didn't hesitate. Moving swiftly, he ducked into an alley, forcing the shadow to reveal itself. A single figure stepped out, face partially obscured, but the intent was clear. Threat. Intrusion. Danger. And suddenly, everything he had been suppressing, the need to protect, the fear of losing her, flared inside him like a storm. Looking for someone? The figure said, voice low, laced with menace. I'm not alone, he replied evenly, every muscle ready, but his mind was elsewhere, on her. He couldn't let her be caught in this, not now, not ever. The man lunged and instinct took over. Years of training, violence, and survival honed every move. The fight was brutal, precise, and swift, leaving no room for hesitation. But even as he neutralized the threat, the thought of her, her unknowing presence at the café, her trust, fueled a protective rage he hadn't felt in years. Afterward, standing in the dim alley, he caught his breath, hands still shaking slightly, heart racing, not from exertion but from the awareness of how close it had come. She didn't know, she couldn't know yet, the world she occupied was fragile, unprepared for the storms he carried. And he had to keep it that way. The next morning he returned to the café, every step measured, every expression controlled. But as he pushed open the door, the familiar warmth hit him, not just the scent of coffee but the presence of her. She was behind the counter, moving as if she had no idea the danger that had brushed so close the night before. You look tired, she said casually, a knowing glance in her eyes, though she didn't understand how sharp the night had been. I slept well, he replied, voice steady, though the truth lingered unsaid. He wanted to tell her, to reveal the dangers and the darkness that shadowed him constantly. But he couldn't. She was too precious, too fragile in this world he couldn't control. Their conversation unfolded, light and seemingly ordinary, yet beneath it ran an undercurrent, tension, connection, a magnetic pull neither could deny. He noticed the subtle gestures, the small smiles, the way she looked at him, and every piece pulled him deeper into a territory he had long avoided, vulnerability. By mid-afternoon, the café had quieted, and they found themselves alone, the air thick with unsaid words. Why do you keep looking out for me? She asked softly, almost to herself. He froze, caught off guard. The question was simple, but it cut to the core of him. He wanted to answer honestly, wanted to tell her that he saw her as more than just a barista, more than just another person in a city full of people. But the words couldn't come. Not yet. Instead, he said, because I don't trust the world around you. And I don't trust myself around you either. Her brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't push further. She knew, somehow, that his words carried weight beyond explanation. And in that silence, something shifted. A mutual understanding, a bond forged not just by attraction, but by the recognition of danger and trust intertwined. As he left the café that evening, the chill in the air seemed sharper, almost mocking. He had won the fight last night, yes, but he knew the battles were only beginning. Protecting her, keeping her close yet safe, navigating the dangerous world he inhabited, it was a storm with no end in sight. And yet, as he disappeared into the darkened streets, one thought remained, stubborn and consuming. No matter the cost, he would not let anything, or anyone, take her from him. She was no longer just a fleeting presence in his life. She had become a claim, a truth, and a danger he was willing to embrace. If you like, I can continue with Chapter 7 next, where the first serious external threat collides directly with the café and her safety, pushing him to make a bold move. The city never slept, but tonight it seemed to hum with a dangerous energy, a tension he could feel pressing against his skin. He moved through the streets with the precision of a predator, senses alert, but his mind was elsewhere, on her. Every image of her face, every echo of her laugh from the café, played like a dangerous melody he couldn't ignore. She was too exposed, too unaware, and that fact gnawed at him. He had hoped the alley incident was a warning, a reminder that shadows were always lurking. But now he knew it wasn't just a warning, it was a prelude. Someone wanted her. And by extension they wanted him. As he approached the café he slowed, pretending to be casual, blending into the flow of the city. The door swung open and the scent of roasted beans hit him first, followed by the subtle hum of the espresso machine. And then he saw her, her hair slightly mussed, hands deftly moving across the counter, and the soft curve of her smile when she noticed him. She looked so ordinary, so untouchable, yet he felt the world could crush her in an instant and no one would stop it. He stepped closer, forcing himself to breathe, forcing himself to remain calm. "You've got company," he muttered under his breath, scanning the café. Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, a figure slipped through the side entrance, moving with deliberate stealth. His instincts screamed, imminent danger. The intruder wasn't just someone looking to cause trouble. This was calculated, targeted. He moved in a blur, positioning himself between her and the threat. The man's eyes flicked to him, surprise flashing before recognition and then malice. "I've been looking for you," the stranger hissed, voice low but deadly. "Not today," he replied, voice controlled, but every fiber of him coiled for violence. He wasn't about to let anyone harm her. Not tonight. Not ever. The fight erupted in an almost cinematic chaos. Chairs overturned, the smell of coffee mingling with adrenaline and fear. She shrieked once, ducking behind the counter, and he caught a flash of panic in her eyes that ignited something fierce in him. Every strike he delivered was precise, deadly, born of years of experience. But each movement also carried restraint. He had to ensure she remained safe, untouched by the danger he couldn't fully control. The intruder lunged again, but he anticipated, sidestepping, twisting, and redirecting the momentum with surgical precision. A vase shattered, coffee splattering across the floor, but she remained behind the counter, watching, heart pounding, silently praying she wouldn't have to move. Finally, the man crumpled, unconscious, and he stood over him, chest heaving, eyes scanning the cafe to ensure she was unharmed. She was safe but visibly shaken, a hand pressed to her chest as if trying to contain the terror. He exhaled slowly, bending slightly, voice low but firm. "It's over. For now." She looked up, voice trembling. Who was that?" "Someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near you," he replied. There was no room for lies, no room for sugarcoating. The danger was real and it had found her. "You don't know it yet, but the world out there, it can be brutal. And people like me, we try to make sure you never have to see it." Her eyes searched his, a mixture of awe, fear, and something unspoken. "Why do you care so much?" The question hit him harder than the fight had. He wanted to answer truthfully, to tell her that she had already claimed a part of him he had long thought untouchable. That every risk, every danger, every calculated move he made was now colored by her existence. But the words faltered. Instead he said, "Because some things are worth fighting for. And you're one of them." Silence fell between them, heavy and charged. She nodded slowly, understanding more than he had expected. Maybe she sensed the storms he carried, maybe she saw the edges of danger brushing against him and realized the price of connection. He knew the fight outside the cafe wasn't the last. It was just the beginning. But for the first time he considered a truth he had long avoided. She wasn't just collateral in his life of shadows. She was a reason, a beacon, a claim he was unwilling to relinquish. As he walked her home that night, the streets no longer felt empty or anonymous. Every shadow could hide a threat, every alley a danger. But the thought of her safety became a rhythm in his chest, driving him, sharpening his instincts, anchoring him in a world where trust was rare and love even rarer. By the time they reached her building, the night had deepened into a quiet, tense darkness. He paused, hand lingering at the small of her back, just enough to guide, just enough to protect. "Promise me something," he said, voice low. "What?" she asked. "Stay alert. And trust no one outside this door." She swallowed hard, nodding. And in that moment, a silent pact was formed, not just of safety but of hearts colliding, of stakes rising, of a bond that would be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. If you want, I can start chapter 8 next, where the past catches up with him, bringing both enemies and secrets that threaten their bond, forcing them to confront the intensity of their connection. The morning light spilled into the cafe, soft and deceptive, like it had no idea the storm brewing outside its walls. He arrived before opening, hood up, keeping to the shadows of the empty streets. Last night's fight had left him restless, every muscle still tensed, every sense alert. He knew it wasn't over. The intruder had been just a message, a warning, and he had a feeling whoever sent it was just beginning to play their game. She was already inside, hands busy with orders, but her expression betrayed sleeplessness. Dark circles kissed her eyes, and her movements were slightly more hesitant than usual. He approached and she glanced up, startled but relieved. "You're early," she said softly. "I need to make sure you're safe," he said, voice low. "It's not just random what happened last night. Someone's watching, waiting? She froze for a moment, taking in his intensity. Watching? Waiting? What do you mean? Before he could answer, the bell above the cafe door jingled, sharp and deliberate. A figure stepped in, dressed impeccably, but the presence was familiar, the kind that made you notice the air itself change. His heart tensed. Recognition flared. It wasn't just a stranger. This was someone from his past, someone whose shadow stretched across his life in ways he had spent years trying to escape. The newcomer's eyes landed on him, and a smirk played on lips that had once been dangerous companions in a world he thought he had left behind. Well, the man said smoothly. Looks like you've been busy. The cafe felt smaller, the air thicker. He stepped in front of her without thinking, instincts flaring. What do you want? He demanded. Straight to business, I like that, the man replied, voice casual but dripping with threat. You've taken something that belongs to me. He bristled, a warning ripple vibrating in his chest. She's not yours. Ah, the man said, voice softening almost mockingly, that's where you're wrong. He glanced at her and she stiffened, sensing a history, a dangerous tension neither fully explained. She's connected. A thread to everything you've built, everything you've kept hidden. He clenched his fists. That word, connected, made the hairs on his neck rise. Her life was no longer her own. And in a way it had never been. Her presence had brought light, but light always casts shadows, and his past was a shadow long and cruel. She looked between them, confused and frightened. Connected? What do you mean? He swallowed, knowing some truths were too heavy to carry even for her. It's complicated. But right now your safety, our safety, depends on keeping secrets. The intruder's smirk widened. Secrets are fragile things, he said. And I'm very good at breaking them. Time slowed. He could feel the tension like a coiled spring ready to snap. She took a step back, instinctively sensing the danger he had tried to shield her from for so long. His gaze softened just for a heartbeat. Stay behind me, he said, almost a whisper but firm. The man's eyes flicked to her again. You've chosen poorly, he said, voice low, dangerous, carrying the weight of old grudges. One day you'll understand. And when that day comes. He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung heavy in the air. He could feel the pulse of old debts, old rivalries pressing forward, threatening to crush everything he had started to build in this fragile, tender life. She blinked, taking in the tension, sensing the history etched into every line of his face, every movement, every silent warning. Why does he know about me? She asked, voice trembling. He looked down at her, voice quiet but filled with conviction. Because anyone who wants me will eventually find you. And anyone who finds you will test me. Her eyes widened, a mixture of fear and awe. The realization hit her that her life, her choices, and even her heart were now intertwined with a man whose past was a battlefield she could only glimpse. And in that moment she understood. The world he belonged to was ruthless, and stepping into it meant danger wasn't optional, it was inevitable. The man smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind that carries memory and menace in equal measure. I'll be seeing you soon, he said, turning sharply, leaving as quickly as he had entered, the bell above the cafe door announcing his departure like the toll of a warning bell. The quiet that followed was suffocating. She looked up at him, eyes wide, questions unasked but understood. He exhaled slowly, closing the gap between them, hand brushing lightly against her arm, a grounding presence in the storm. You have to understand, he said, voice low, urgent, this is far from over. But whatever happens, I won't let anything happen to you. Not now. Not ever. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Ever? She whispered. His gaze held hers, fierce, unyielding, and almost desperate. Ever? He said. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the collision of past and present, to the sparks of danger and desire that had ignited within these walls. But inside, hearts were tethered, stakes were rising, and a bond had been forged in the quiet terror of revelation. And as she stared at him, she knew their story, messy, dangerous, forbidden, was just beginning. The city hummed with its usual indifference, but inside the cafe the air was charged. The morning rush had barely begun, yet every customer seemed like a shadow moving through his awareness. He couldn't shake the feeling that last night's visitor was just the opening act. Whoever had come had known exactly where to strike to unsettle him, and now the question gnawed at him, how much did they know about her? She arrived earlier than usual, hands trembling slightly as she arranged pastries and cups. Her nervous energy didn't escape him. He studied her from across the counter, every instinct screaming that danger was closer than she imagined. Don't look so tense, she said, catching him staring. It's just another day. Nothing about today is just another day, he muttered under his breath, voice low, roughened with warning. She frowned but didn't press. She trusted him, she always had, but even trust has limits when the stakes are this high. The door jingled again, the sound slicing through the calm like a knife. She flinched, he did not. A courier stepped inside, unremarkable at first glance, carrying a small envelope with no return address. The courier's eyes lingered just a second too long before he left, and the envelope was all that remained, a silent scream across the threshold. He opened it, the motion deliberate, careful. Inside was a single photograph, her sitting outside a café in broad daylight, smiling. But the photograph wasn't recent, it was taken yesterday, moments before she had come to work. And at the corner of the photo, in sharp, almost cruel handwriting, "She is mine." A low growl escaped him, silent and dangerous. He felt the air constrict around him, the pulse of past enemies thrumming through his veins. She noticed the change instantly, eyes widening. Who sent this? No one you know, he said, though the truth was messier than that. Every enemy he'd ever made, every debt owed, every betrayal unpunished, they could all be behind this. The chilling realization made his stomach tighten. I don't understand, she stammered, fear creeping into her voice. Why me? Why now? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because anyone who wants me knows that hurting you is the fastest way to get to me. And I have a long list of people who want me. Her eyes filled with unshed tears, but not from sadness, from the raw intensity of the world she had just glimpsed. Then I don't want to be a part of this world, she whispered. He shook his head, a mix of frustration and something heavier in his expression. You are already a part of it. Whether you want to be or not. She swallowed, trying to steady herself. The fear was real, visceral, and yet there was something in his presence that rooted her, made her feel less like prey and more like something precious, worth fighting for. He studied the photo again, tracing the edges with a finger. This is more than a threat, he murmured. It's a message. They know where you are, what you do, even who you care about. And it's only the beginning. Her hands gripped the counter tightly, knuckles white. Then what do we do? He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carries years of burden and unspoken guilt. We prepare. We stay alert. And you trust me. I will keep you safe. But you have to understand, safety is temporary. There is no forever in this world. Only moments. Her gaze met his, searching for a thread of hope in the storm he had just revealed. Moments? You mean, we only have moments together? He wanted to lie, to promise her something he couldn't deliver. But honesty, brutal as it was safer. For now, he said. And that's all that matters. For now. The café felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of unspoken threats. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the tension, the secrets, the invisible chess game unfolding. Inside, hearts collided, pulsing in rhythm with danger, each beat a reminder that life could change in an instant. She leaned closer, voice trembling but determined. Then let me help. If we're in this, we're in it together. He stared at her, emotions warring behind dark eyes, fear, possessiveness, desire, and an unfamiliar thread of hope. Slowly, deliberately he nodded. Together, he said. But know this, anyone who tries to take you from me will regret it. They won't survive the consequences. Outside the window, a black car idled at the corner, shadows pooling in the rearview mirror. No one spoke, but both felt the weight of it, the inevitability that their world was about to collide violently with forces neither of them could ignore. And in that quiet, fleeting moment before chaos struck, they understood, the bond forged in fear and desire was no longer fragile. It was a weapon, and the war had only just begun. The night swallowed the city whole, streets slick with rain, reflecting the neon glow like fractured glass. He moved through the darkness with practiced precision, every step calculated, every sense alert. Her hand found his, tentative at first, then firm, her way of grounding herself, of claiming a connection that had become as dangerous as it was undeniable. They didn't speak much, words were luxuries in moments like this. The photograph from yesterday still burned in his mind, its message a silent countdown. Whoever was behind this had underestimated one thing. Him. And yet, underestimating anyone connected to him, especially her, was a mistake that could prove fatal. A sound, metal scraping against asphalt, made him freeze. He tilted his head, listening. Shadows moved along the alley ahead. He stepped forward, pulling her behind him, body tight against hers. Stay close. Don't look around. She nodded, heart hammering against his chest. She had never felt fear like this, but she had never felt protection like this either. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and it tied them together in a way that neither could deny. A figure emerged from the darkness, hooded, gloved, carrying a small gun. The glint of metal reflected the streetlight, sending a chill through her spine. Her grip tightened on his arm. He didn't flinch. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure said, voice low, mocking. "You've already lost, boss." He stepped forward, voice calm but lethal. "Try me. I promise you won't live long enough to regret it." The figure smirked, then vanished into a blur of motion. Bullets ricocheted, sharp and close. He lunged, pulling her down behind a dumpster, heart racing but mind razor-sharp. Every movement was precise, every reaction practiced. He wasn't just protecting himself, he was protecting her, the one person who had claimed a piece of him he hadn't realized he needed until now. The firefight was short but violent. Shadows collided, gunmetal clashing with determination. When it was over, the figure lay unconscious and the message was clear. This was only the beginning, but they had survived, for now. Breathing heavily, he pulled her close, feeling the tremor in her body. "Are you hurt?" he asked, though his eyes already scanned for more threats. I'm okay," she whispered, voice shaky. But her gaze was unwavering, meeting his with something fiercer than fear, defiance, trust, and a growing realization that she wasn't just along for the ride. She was a participant in their war now, whether she liked it or not. He studied her, dark eyes softening for the briefest moment. "You've changed everything," he said low, almost a growl. "I've lived my life thinking I controlled everything. But this, you've made me see that some things can't be controlled. Only protected." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, tentative but certain. "Then let me protect you too," she said. "I'm not afraid of you, or them." He smiled, a flash of something almost human in its warmth. "Almost. Good. Because fear is the only thing that makes people weak. And weakness gets people killed." They moved again, leaving the alley behind, hearts racing, minds alert. The city didn't notice them, the world went on as usual. But they knew better. Every step they took, every glance over their shoulders, was a reminder that their lives had changed irreversibly. At the café they returned, drenched but unbroken. The familiarity of the place was a balm, yet even here tension lingered like a second shadow. He set down the photograph, now damp from rain, and she leaned against the counter. "You think it's over?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, it never is. They'll come again. They always do. But we'll be ready. And we have something they'll never understand. Each other." Her lips quirked into a smile, a mix of relief and defiance. "Then let them come. We'll face them, together." He looked at her, and for the first time in years, the world outside didn't matter as much as the world between them. The danger, the chaos, the threats, they were just noise. What mattered was this connection, forged in fire, fear, and undeniable desire. And in that moment, the city held its breath, waiting for the next move, the next challenge. But inside the café, two hearts collided and refused to let go, a quiet rebellion against a world that demanded fear. The war wasn't over. But for now they had each other. And sometimes that was enough to make the darkness bearable.